Hey everyone, this is Miss Birch, and I want to talk to you today about levels of organization. And we're going to start with the very small and work our way on up to the very large. Some of the terms we're going to talk about should be review from when you studied body systems in the earlier grades. And then at the end, we're going to be really focusing in on our vocabulary for the ecology unit. And these are terms that you're going to be responsible for knowing and working with and using. Those of you that have Mrs. Coveney for language arts and are reading Hoot, you're going to have a couple of projects to do for both of us that will work with this vocabulary. So you'll have this as a reference, and I can answer any questions that you have. So let's start our discussion over on the left-hand side up at the top where it says atoms. And atoms, our basic definition is that it is the basic unit of matter. An atom is really as small as you can go and have that substance have the properties that we associate with that substance. Atoms are made up of smaller particles. You may have heard of protons, neutrons, and electrons. But once you get down to that level, it's no longer that stuff. So if you have an atom of gold and an atom of iron, they're both made up of smaller particles, but the atom is as small as you can go and still be able to say, hey, that's gold, or hey, that's iron. Next, we move up to the level of the molecule. A molecule is basically when two or more atoms combine to form a substance that is different from either of the molecules that make it up. So an example that I've given you is water. Water is made up of two hydrogen atoms and one oxygen atom. That's where we get the chemical symbol H2O. And water is a completely new substance. It doesn't have the same properties as hydrogen on its own or oxygen on its own. When they combine to form a molecule, you get something that is a completely new and unique substance. So some other molecules that you may be familiar with: CO2, carbon dioxide, NH3, which is ammonia. The oxygen that you breathe is actually O2, which is two molecules of two atoms of oxygen. And then there's a molecule that has three atoms of oxygen, and that's ozone, which you may have heard of. Moving on to the next level, we've got cells. And a cell, as you may know from your work with body systems, the cell is defined as the basic unit of life. Don't confuse that with an atom. An atom is the basic unit of matter. It's as small as you can go and still have the properties of that matter. A cell is as small as you can go and still say, that thing is alive. Now, we've studied the characteristics of living things, so you know what I mean. A cell is as small as you can go and still see something that can grow, develop, reproduce, maintain a stable internal environment. Obviously, it's made of a cell. So it's as small as you can go. Cells are made up of smaller parts, what are called organelles. But once we get down to that level, we can't say, the nucleus of the cell is alive. Okay? Moving on to the next level, we have tissue. Now, tissue is a collection of cells that are similar to each other that come together to form, kind of the building blocks for organs. So some examples, there's muscle tissue, there's heart tissue, there's bone tissue, etc. The next level, tissues come together to form organs, and organs are a group of tissues that function together to carry out life processes. So some examples that I'm sure you're familiar with, things like the heart, the liver, and the skin. As you probably also know, organs come together to form body systems. So these are groups of organs that together carry out some sort of life process. That could be the skeletal system that's used for movement and support, the circulatory system, which moves materials around in your body, the immune system, and so on. Now, the next level on our chart here is the organism. And basic definition for an organism is a living thing. And as we've talked about, a living thing could just be one cell big, or it could contain trillions of cells like we do. Now I'm going to insert a definition here. It's one that we've talked about in class. It's not on the diagram, but I've put it in, and that is species. So species is a group of organisms that are very similar to each other. They're more similar than they are different. And they can interbreed and produce offspring that can also interbreed. Now we've talked about this in class. An example of something that doesn't quite fit the definition would be something like a mule. A mule is a cross between a horse and a donkey, and it's definitely an organism, but a group of mules, two mules cannot interbreed and produce more offspring. If you want more mules, you've got to cross more donkeys with horses. So they don't quite meet that definition of a species. So that's going to be one of the really key terms that we're going to be dealing with as we go through the year. Okay, and now we're getting into some of our new ecosystem vocabulary, and these next few terms are going to be super important. You're going to have to work with them in a lot of different ways. And I might just as well tell you guys here, if you hear big commotion, it's because I just let my puppy Molly in, and I'm sitting in her favorite chair, so she might jump up on me at any point, and I'll have to pause, and you'll hear all this commotion, but hopefully she'll be a good girl. All right, so now we're looking at population. And you can kind of see in the picture there, it's a little bit small, but you've got basically a group of elephants. That's to illustrate that a population is all the members of a species that live in a defined area. So if you think about human populations, we could talk about the number of people who live in Sanford. Okay, and that we'd count everybody that lives there, and that would give us a certain population. We could also talk about the population of York County. Sanford would be part of that, but it also includes other areas and would give us a bigger population. We could talk about the population of Maine, the population of New England, the population of the United States, the population of North America, and so on. So when you talk about a population, you have to do two things. You've got to state what species it is you're talking about, and you've got to talk about where those numbers are being counted. You have to define the area. Moving up to the next level, when we talk about the community in an area, we're talking about all the populations that live there. And don't forget, we're not just talking about animal populations here. We're talking about tree, plants, fungus, bacterial populations, everything. So the community is all the populations in an area. Now, if you notice in the ecosystem picture, and again, it's pretty small, but you might notice that they've added in a mountain and a little lake, and you can see a little bit more of the surrounding area. Because when we start talking about an ecosystem, we're not just talking about the living things in an area. We're talking about the non-living things in an area. So, and we'll be talking about what those are more specifically. And instead of using the term living and non-living when we discuss this, we're going to be introducing some new terms, biotic and abiotic. That means basically living and non-living. So when we talk about an ecosystem, we're talking about everything that's there in the environment, living and non-living, and their interactions with each other. And by an interaction, I mean if we have two species that are interacting with each other. So a coyote eats a deer. That's a predator-prey relationship. Those two species are interacting. Okay? Probably the deer doesn't really like that interaction, but the coyote is happy. We can also talk about, an interaction between a plant and an animal. A bird that builds a nest in a tree. That's an interaction between two living things, the bird and the tree. But there are also interactions between living things and the non-living parts of their environment. So an example of that would be a fish that lives in the water and breathes oxygen out of the water. It could be a plant taking in carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. So we're going to be kind of looking at all the different types of interactions that can happen within ecosystems, and really kind of breaking it down and looking at ecosystem by ecosystem, what are the interactions. And here I have to tell you that Molly has picked up a squeaky toy, so if you hear some squeaking in the background, that's what it is. And the last definition that we have is the biosphere. And what that is the biosphere is defined as every place on planet Earth where life can be found. And even in the time that I've been working in science, the biosphere has gotten a lot bigger because we keep discovering new life forms that we didn't know existed before. So now that with our newer technology, we can go deeper into the oceans, we can go deeper into the Earth's crust, we can go higher up into the atmosphere and really see what's there. And scientists are making all sorts of discoveries about living things, organisms that do meet the criteria for life that we've been studying. They found living things very deep in the crust of the Earth, very deep down in the oceans in what are called mid-ocean trenches in some really, really extreme conditions. And living things can be found at very, very high up levels of the atmosphere where you wouldn't think anything could sustain life, but it is there. So all of these regions on the Earth where any living thing can be found, that is what makes up the biosphere. So you've got all your definitions here. A lot of these terms we're going to be working with over and over and over again. You can hear Molly squeaking in the background probably. So hold on to this presentation. You're going to, you can refer back to it as you're working on different projects and different assignments as we work through the ecology unit. And anything that you have a question on, just be sure you ask. I will see you in class. Talk to you later. Bye.